today, and I'm really excited about our guest today. It's just a really great discussion around the outcome that we're trying to bring, which is giving everybody a chance, an opportunity, an equal opportunity at some role, right? At some job or something that they want to do. So first of all, Anthony Ianni, welcome to the show. How are you, man?
Doing good, UB. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how would you introduce yourself to our audience?
So I'm Anthony Ianni. I'm a national motivational speaker, autism and anti-bullying advocate, and soon to be author. My first book, Title Centered, comes out September 7th, and also the NCAA's first Division I college basketball player with autism. So lot of things to throw in there, but I'm very proud of all those titles. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and we were talking before we hit record about labels, right? Those are all labels. Yep. So, I mean, talk to me about your journey, like starting when you were 4 or 5, and being diagnosed and labeled, essentially. Like, talk about how you got here.
Yeah, so originally I'm from Athens, Ohio. So I was there for 4 years. And then when I was 4 years old, I was diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder, or otherwise known as PDD-NOS. It's a form of autism on the autism spectrum. And, there were some things that my mom saw that just did not look right. So if my mom had told me, go pick out a red shirt from your closet, I wouldn't come back with a red shirt. I would come back with something completely different. Or she would tell me, Anthony, go pick up the toys in the toy room. Instead of putting the toys away, I get more toys out. So she just knew like something wasn't right. And then just me, the overload of a stimulus of an environment was just too much for me. And she knew something wasn't right. And so when she first got me, when I first went to get diagnosed, the doctors thought it was ADD. But my mom, who coached college volleyball at Ohio University at the time, she was like, no, like I have volleyball players who have ADD. Like I know what ADD is. My son does not have it. And
right.
So the second time they went back, that's when the autism diagnosis came into play. And so now they had to understand. My parents didn't quite have to understand what autism was, UB, because during that time period, the early 90s, nobody even knew what autism was. Like nobody knew a lot of the characteristics of it. There was no awareness for it during that time. And there was basically no path or guidance or resources for families who were affected by autism during that time period to help them. So a year later, when I was 5 years old, a group of doctors and professionals had told my parents that because I have autism, they told my parents not to expect anything or much from me. They told my family I would barely graduate from high school, never go to college, never be an athlete, and I would likely end up in a group institution with other autistic kids like myself for the rest of my life. My parents did not tell me this story until I was a freshman in high school. So that kind of became my motivation to go out and prove those people and any other doubters and naysayers that had my life wrong. I had to work extremely hard at everything from basketball to my social life, and especially school, because I'm not afraid to admit this. I was not the smartest kid that walked through the hallways at Oakland High School. But in the process, I had a lot of support from a lot of people. I had a lot of support from my friends, my teammates, my coaches, my teachers, and especially my family. So I went on to graduate from Okemos in 2007, where I then went on to Grand Valley State University, a Division II school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for 2 years on a full ride scholarship. Didn't quite work out for me there, so I decided to transfer from Grand Valley State to go live my lifelong dream, which was to play for Coach Tom Izzo and the Michigan State Spartans. So I was walk-on at Michigan State for 2 years. My third year, I received a full ride scholarship from Coach Izzo, was a part of 2 Big Ten championship teams, a team that won the Big Ten tournament title, a team that went to a Final Four, got to play with an outstanding group of guys who to this day I'm proud to call them my brothers. But, as I mentioned before, during my time at Michigan State, I became the NCAA's first known Division I college basketball player with an autism diagnosis in history. And not only that, I was able to get my bachelor's degree in sociology from Michigan State too. So, I mean, there were a lot of things when I was younger that people thought that would not happen, but because of the support and the sacrifices that my parents and a lot of my family members made for me was the biggest reason why I was able to get where I'm at today.
I mean, I just love the story, and it's crazy, right? Because getting the wrong color T-shirt, right, or shirt, right, or not getting more toys out, like that's me just seems like an ornery 4-year-old, right? Like it's like, I mean, my nephew is just here, right? Same thing. Like he does the same thing, right? But so it's interesting because you talked about the tests, right? So the doctors actually did tests, right? There were assessments, and tying this to kind of what we do from a hiring perspective, right? There's assessments out there and things like that, but man, how easy it is to erroneously judge somebody just based on an assessment here or there, right? Without really understanding or using it in the right way, right? I feel like they didn't use it in the right way, right? I think it could tell us some things, but they just made a blanket judgment statement to your parents about who you were going to be. You were like, they weren't giving you any opportunity.
No, and that's the thing too. Like, when my parents first told me that story of what happened when I was 5 about that meeting, my first initial reaction was, who would say it's about a 5-year-old? Because during that period, like I didn't learn all my math at the time. I was still trying to figure out counting from 0 to 20 and then 20 back to 0. So I'm still trying to learn a lot of things in the process. And so, throughout my entire school career, I was a very slow learner. Like I didn't like process things like that, or a 4.0 straight A student, would get things quickly, but for me, if I had to do a simple math problem, like I had to take it step by step and minute by minute. Like I couldn't just throw it all together. Same thing with writing a paper. Like they gave me instructions on, okay, you start with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, for me, that beginning took me a while because I had to process okay, the beginning is going to be this. I got to draft out the beginning. Okay, the beginning is good. Now let's, the middle, let's process that out, because a lot of students, especially the ones with 4.0 straight A students, like they'll get it done quickly like that because they know the process and they know in, just that studying process, they're better. I don't want to say better equipped, but they're better at handling it than most students do because they balance it out quickly. Whereas for somebody like me who's on the autism spectrum, like I got to take my time. I should say I had to take my time. Obviously, I'm graduating now, but so for me, having that slow learning process, it helped me be successful as a student. So I think that's what the doctors kind of saw when I was younger, was that I processed things slower than any other of my classmates did at that time. But again, that was the time period in the early 90s, mid 90s, where nobody knew a whole lot about autism. Nobody had resources, paths, or guidance for it. And that was kind of the thing. Like, my father, during that meeting, when they got to the third expert, he got up out of his chair. He cut the person off and said, look, like, I appreciate what you're doing. We respect what you're doing, but let me tell you what our expectations are for our son. He's going to go to high school. He's going to graduate. He's going to go to college and he's going to graduate. Like, he doesn't have to be a college. He doesn't have to be an athlete to do all this. Like, if the good Lord wants to bless our son with those abilities and gifts, then great, cool. But like, he's going to go to college and graduate. He's going to do all these things that you say he can't. And so, but after my dad said that, him and my mom just looked at each other like, okay, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Because again, what do we do? There are no paths. There are no guidance. But the late Sandy McDonald, who was the special education director at Okemos Public Schools at the time, she stayed behind my parents and she told them, she said, you're right. We're going to figure out a way. And they all came together and they worked together to make sure that I got the right resources and accommodations I need to be successful. And so I owe a lot to, Sandy McDonald. I mean, God bless. I mean, she did everything and more for us. And
yeah,
I know she's no longer here, but like, I know she's watching every single move that I do and everything that I do as an advocate. So, but she was the biggest reason why, my parents were able to get a jump start and get ahead of the game when it came to getting those resources and accommodations for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. What do you tell people who don't have access to that kind of support, right? Like, and this kind of, because there's parallels here to a lot of underrepresented groups of people who aren't given the opportunities. And I think we've seen it in the last year and a half after George Floyd's murder, with all the discussions around systemic inequalities. What do you say to people who don't have a Sandy or your parents? Like, where can they go?
I've always told people UB is to find them.
Yeah.
Because they may be right in front of you for all we know. They may be right behind you for all we know. Because
Sure.
I've had a lot of students ask me questions like, well, I don't have a lot of family support. Who can I go to if I don't have that? And I've always told them, I said, you got support right here in your school. Like your principals got you, your teachers will support you, your guidance counselor. And so that's what I've always told parents is like, but also, kind of browse a little bit too, because there are so many different organizations and different resources in those organizations that can help families find a Sandy McDonald, that can help them find a great public school system that'll help accommodate their son or daughter with accommodations and the resources needed. And so that's the one thing I've always told parents and individuals is that, browse outside of your school district, because there are so many different new and exciting organizations, whether they're nonprofits or not, that have one goal and mission in mind, and that's to help individuals on the autism spectrum or help individuals with disabilities and help accommodate them in every way possible. So I've always told parents, either get on Google or word of mouth. That's the other thing I've learned too as a speaker is that you've had a lot of people who, you'll talk to somebody and go, oh, like I know somebody in this, you should give so-and-so a call. So you never know. So you always just got to keep your eyes and ears open. But don't stop looking, because the last thing you want to do is just, quit and not find anything in the process.
Well, and this ties really nicely back to an episode that aired a couple weeks ago with our guest David Knorr, who was talking about the who, right? And to kind of tie this to business too, when we try to solve problems, it's often we're often looking more for like the what and the how. When to your point, the solution or a variety of potential solutions are in the who that are around you, right? Like we don't even talk to each other here on our teams even, or we don't even look outside our department, for example, to your point about looking outside your school district, your department. Look for who. You have a network. We all have a network of people, and there isn't just one solution to every problem. And there's but the only way to figure that out is by talking to a lot of people. Like go find their perspective, go ask their perspective. So it should start with the who. And that's what I love about what you're talking about, because we forget that, I think, in this country where it's business first. And, the relationships have never really taken a front seat. But I think now they have to. I think, if anything, with what COVID taught us being behind a screen like this, is that we crave those relationships, or we have to be more intentional, right, about those. Because like you do a lot with anti-bullying. So how does that affect what's that message there for you from that perspective?
So I bring two messages, for my anti-bullying initiative called the Relentless Tour. Backtrack a little bit. So I started the Relentless Tour 8 years ago, and initially it became the state of Michigan's first grassroots initiative of its kind when it came to anti-bullying. And initially people thought it was going to be a statewide initiative, but then it only took a year and a half to become a nationwide initiative. So anybody who's listening that is interested in bringing myself and the Relentless Tour in, go to anthonyianni.com to learn more. But the messages that the tour brings is two of them. The first one is be careful what you say and do to others, because you never know who that person will be like in the future. And a lot of good examples I bring up with that message is look at the celebrities that a lot of today's students look up to. So some celebrities who were bullied as kids include Eminem, Justin Timberlake, Selena Gomez, Michael Phelps, Taylor Swift, Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And when I name those names off, a lot of these kids will look at it. And the one thing I always do, UB, as a speaker, I always see what my audience does and how they react. Because as a speaker, this is the one thing I missed in the last year and a half, which I'm excited to get back to here in a couple of weeks, is I missed that live energy from the crowd. I missed that live reaction. Whereas, behind the screens on Zoom, you couldn't see that as much. You couldn't see it. Like I could see the kids in the classroom, but I couldn't tell their reactions. I couldn't see it. They're looking over here at this person. Thinking, or like their eyes just get widened up and just light up a room. So whenever I mention these celebrities' names, I'll have these kids like look at each other and go, wait, what? Like Michael Jordan was bullied as a kid?
No way. Yeah.
Like Justin Timberlake, seriously, like Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, like, yeah. And a lot of these kids look up to those individuals. And when they hear that, especially the bullies, I think a lot of them kind of step back and go, all right, you know what? If Justin Timberlake was bullied as a kid for these reasons and look where he's at today, maybe that individual I'm bullying over here, they could be that next Justin Timberlake. They could be the next great athlete. They could be the biggest name in the world one day, or the inventor of something bigger and better than iPhones and iPads. Like, you never know. Right. So therefore, be careful what you say and do the others. And the last message I always bring is, don't just go out and be the change, but go out and make that change. Because the one thing I've always told students, UB, and I'll continue to tell them for a long, long time, is that the change does not start with Anthony Ianni. It doesn't start with the governors of their state. It doesn't start with, their teachers, their principal. It doesn't start with whoever's president of this country, because it never has and it never will be. The change will always start with those students, because they're the ones that change somebody's day from bad to great. They're the ones that change somebody's life from incredible to incredible. And at the end of the day, they could be the number one reason why they saved somebody's life. They really could be. And, the letters and the feedback that I've gotten for, my bullying presentation have been great and all. But, when I have a student say to me, I saw somebody because of your presentation, I wanted to stand up to bullies in the hallway today, which I did. And I've always responded with, hey, that's not me. That's you, because you're the one that wants to stop it and end all of it. You're the one that wants to see change in your school. So you're doing that, not me. And so those are two messages that the Relentless Tour brings. I'm very proud of that. And, I think this is why I'm excited to get back on the road this fall, is because it's messages that students need right now. Yeah, I think they've been waiting a year and a half, and I think they've been craving to get a message like that back in their life again.
Well, and just to be given a choice, right? It becomes a choice, right? And that's it's the parallels are great, because I think about interviewers. That's who we're helping. The interviewers are our students, but the same exact behaviors are happening, right? Like interviewers are judging somebody for their name. Right. That's how I was bullied. I grew up in the middle of Kansas, and the only Ubaldo, it's my real first name, for thousands of miles. Right. So it's like so it still happens. It happens in the interview process. People are getting judged for how they look, for their names, for how they dress, for their skin color. And in some cases being called out for it, or, questioned about it in an interview process where that has no place. And that to me is a form of bullying that's occurring. But you're right, like, we're the awareness, but they have to make the choice. They got to make the choice to be better and to choose to behave better towards each other. And I think you're right now it's like this crucial transitionary period where we have kind of this once in a lifetime opportunity to get better as people in general, right? And because everything's just been blown out wide for everybody to see and talk about, and it may seem bad right now with a lot of the discourse and disagreements and media the way it is, and politics, but at the end of the day, I feel like that had to happen so that we can have these kind of discussions, right? And give everybody the awareness, but then the choice to be better or not, because then it's on them. It's not the responsibility, like you said, of anybody in power, of the person who's training or speaking. It's their responsibility.
Yeah, agreed. And because everything that goes on in those hallways at school, they're the ones that could be the one to either stop it. Because I've always told kids is that if you see something going on in the hallways at your school and you don't do anything about it, you're the problem. You're part of the problem.
That's it.
So, but if you are the one that goes out and puts an end to it, you are part of the solution. And so, and one of the things that, I try to do as a speaker, like, I try to separate myself from every other speaker around the country. So what I mean by that is I try to do things differently than most people would. And so one of the things that I do is I always treat my presentations like my classroom, if you will, if I have a classroom, for example. So if I'm in an auditorium or a gym, or even like in just a small room, I will treat those areas as my classroom, because I'm not just there to present. I'm teaching these kids. I'm teaching in about life and messages, if you will. So if there is a student that gets out of hand in my presentation, I'm not afraid to call them out. I'm not afraid to do that. And of course, with the principal's permission, of course, I've yet to have a principal be like, oh no, don't do that. I've always had a principal say, if it's going to be somebody, it's going to be you. So go for it.
Yeah.
Whenever I call out a student, I always tell them, like, what you do in the hallways in between classes, that's your time, because that's the kids' free time to goof around and have some fun. But I always warn them, be careful with what they do in the hallways, because I don't want them doing anything stupid and ending up in the principal's office. Yeah. If they're in a classroom, they're on the teacher's time, because that's the teacher's time to help them learn, study, and for that student to be better as an individual. But when they're at an assembly and they have presenter who's traveled a long way to be there, and a presenter who knows what he's talking about, you're on one person's time, and that's mine. And I've always told those students, because at the end, they usually come back to me and say, hey, why did this happen? What did I, because I've had students apologize for those, for their, acts and how they did when I called them out. But then their friends will come back next to them and say, well, why did you call me out? I didn't do anything. I said, well, here's why. Because even though you were listening to the presentation, which I thank you for, but you were sitting in between your buddies, and you could have been the one to either elbow one of your buddies right in the shoulder and be like, hey, like, no, like, just pay attention, like, just listen to what he's talking about. So therefore, you were part of the problem and not the solution. So that's just the message that I want you to remember, is that if your buddies are doing stuff like that again in a presentation and it's not mine, just a reminder, tell them to cool it for the next half hour and like just chill and listen to what is going on, because it's something it's probably a good message that they don't want to miss out on. And so like you said, it's about becoming the solution, not being part of the problem. And I think that's the message that a lot of students, whenever I go out and speak, they're really starting to, understand more, is that, okay, let's be part of the solution. Let's not be part of the problem. Because again, students may sit back and go, oh, well, I didn't do anything. Yeah, but you were still part of that group. You were still part of the group that was being rowdy and loud and obnoxious, in class or whatever. So you were part of it instead of being part of the solution. So that's always one of my favorite messages I always carry. And I think it's a message that we need to continue to carry for not just our own kids, but for kids and students all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, couple minutes left. Let's talk about Centered. So you're going to be a first-time author. Book comes out soon.
September 7th. Yeah.
Yeah. So it came out already based on the recording, and we're going to publish this. The book's out already. So we'll talk about it. Talk about Centered.
So Centered Autism Basketball One Athlete's Dreams is a memoir about my life growing up with autism. So basically, you heard a little bit about my life story today on your podcast, UB, but in the book you get to hear and read about the whole thing. So there are more stories in there about me being bullied as a kid. There are more stories in there about me being on the autism spectrum. And I also put some of my IEP plan evaluations in there too. So for those listening that don't know what IEP stands for, it stands for Individualized Educational Plan. And one of the things that my co-author and I decided to do was we wanted to put these evaluation plans in there because we wanted to show families who are in the same spot that I was in many years ago to look at this and go, you know what, Anthony Ianni, this is where he was in second grade and third grade. This is what these evaluators saw in him at this age, and look where he's at now. And at first, UB, I was against it because there were some personal things in there that I looked at and go, you know what, like this is a little too personal for me. I don't know if I want this out there for the world to see. And my co-author Rob Keese, who did an incredible job, helping me out with this. He just said to me, look, like if you want this thing to be as impactful as possible, like you need to put this in here, because don't think about what's best for you in this situation. Think about what's best for those parents and those kids who read this and those educators and providers. So when he said that to me, I was like, yeah, you know what? That's what it's mainly about. It's mainly about the readers and what they're going to get out of this. And so, I mean, we've had a lot of great reviews so far, and hopefully we keep continuing to get more and more coming in. But, I'm just excited. And, I can tell you right now, between us, this will not be the last project that me and my co-author do together. We got some other things to work on in the future. But now I'm excited for the release of Centered, and I hope everybody checks it out because they Not only will they get a good life lesson here in never doubting others and rooting for the underdog, but they're also going to get a good educational lesson in what autism is.
Where can they go to buy it?
So they can go on Amazon.com. They can
Okay.
go to IU Press, Barnes and Nobles, or they can also go on AnthonyIanni.com, my website as well.
Perfect. Anthony, it's been a pleasure, man. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, UB. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for continuing to watch. Check out A Higher Future on all the different streaming platforms and on our website. And we'll check you later. Thanks.